The palace corridors were quiet, almost eerily so, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the London night lay thick and still, the only sound a distant clock striking past midnight. Inside Buckingham, history often whispered in these empty halls, and tonight it whispered louder than ever. For tonight, a secret was about to unfold, one that would alter the course of a royal legacy forever. It began with a call, abrupt and unexpected. Not from the king, not from a prince or even a close aide, but a summons meant solely for her. She paused, phone in hand, heart hammering. The message was simple yet charged with an intensity that made her stomach twist. Your presence is requested immediately. The Queen's private secretary, a figure who rarely conveyed emotion, had spoken in measured tones, yet urgency hung in every word. 1,000 questions flitted through her mind. Why her? Why now? But deep down, instinct whispered the same truth she'd felt for years. This was deliberate, personal, unavoidable. And so she rose, slipping into the night with nothing but the cloak of darkness and the weight of expectation on her shoulders. The halls of Buckingham Castle had seen centuries of secrets, whispered promises, and silent manoeuvres, yet tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that tightened around her chest as she made her way past gilded portraits and polished floors that reflected the faint glow of lanterns. She could almost feel the weight of every monarch who had walked these corridors before, as if their ghosts were watching, holding their own counsel. When she reached the Queen's private chamber, the door loomed before her like a portal into the unknown. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. What lay beyond was not merely a room, but a space where trust, truth, and destiny converged. Then, with a steadying breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The Queen, frail yet unmistakably regal, looked up from her chair. Her eyes, those familiar and piercing eyes, held a depth that belied her physical weakness. They were eyes that had commanded nations, brokered peace, and endured scrutiny like few could imagine. But tonight, they carried something else entirely, something heavy with meaning, something that reached straight into the soul. "You've come," the Queen said softly, her voice both a statement and a question. There was no preamble, no ceremonial greeting. This was personal, urgent. She approached slowly, taking in the sight of the woman who had ruled with poise for decades, yet now seemed human in ways the public rarely glimpsed. The frailty of her hands, the tremor in her voice, it all spoke to the passage of time, to the inevitability of change, and yet, beneath it all, there was power. Quiet, unyielding power. The Queen leaned back, eyes narrowing just slightly, the kind of look that could read the truth from a soul. "There are matters," she began, pausing deliberately, "that have remained unspoken. Matters that no one else is ready to hear." Her gaze softened, but the weight of her words pressed down on the room like an invisible force. "And they must be entrusted to someone who understands the essence of duty, who values conscience over ceremony." Her words struck deep, reverberating in a way that made every instinct sharpen. This wasn't about protocol, or even the image of the monarchy. It was about something far more elusive, the soul of it, the legacy, the truth that often lies hidden beneath the crown's glittering exterior. "You understand what it means to serve," the Queen continued, "to bear the responsibilities that cannot be shared lightly. Yet there will come a time when you must choose between what is convenient and what is right, between what is expected and what is just." She leaned forward, voice dropping almost to a whisper. "Not all who bow before the crown are loyal in heart." The words settled like dust in the quiet chamber, each one loaded with meaning. She listened in rapt attention, her pulse quickening. The Queen's message was subtle yet sharp, revealing fractures and truths that were invisible to the public eye. It was a map of unseen loyalties, of hidden intentions, and of the delicate balance that held the monarchy together. For hours they spoke, not in the formal language of state, but in a candid, measured cadence that revealed the heart behind the throne. Confessions, warnings, and reflections flowed freely, each sentence shaping a narrative that had remained secret until now. The Queen spoke of past decisions, of compromises made out of duty rather than desire, and of the consequences that rippled quietly through the corridors of power. "You must carry this carefully," she said, placing a sealed envelope into trembling hands. The wax bore the royal insignia, a symbol of authority and trust. "Do not open this until the time is right, until the moment comes when the crown trembles and the truth must be defended." The weight of the envelope in her palms was more than paper and ink. It was a living command, a responsibility passed silently from one generation to the next. It was the trust of a sovereign, a moral compass meant to guide decisions that could shape history itself. As she left the chamber, the night air felt different, almost heavier. Every shadow seemed to carry meaning, every echo of her footsteps a reminder of the trust now entrusted to her. Outside, the palace remained asleep, unaware of the extraordinary exchange that had just occurred within its walls. Only she knew, only she carried the secret that could redefine loyalty, integrity, and the future of the monarchy. Yet even as she walked away, a part of her trembled. Secrets have a way of slipping, of finding their way into the light. The envelope was meant to remain hidden, but she knew that keeping such truths safe would be no small task. There were whispers in the corridors already, subtle, faint, but they hinted at curiosity and suspicion. And curiosity, in the palace, can be as dangerous as betrayal. The night stretched on, and with it, her thoughts spun. The Queen's words echoed relentlessly. Guard the crown's soul, not its image. Trust is earned, but it can be shattered with a whisper, each word pressed upon her conscience, a reminder that she now walked a path few could understand, a path laden with invisible responsibilities. By the time dawn began to tinge the horizon with pale light, she was seated alone, the envelope secure in her possession, pondering the enormity of what had transpired. The world outside continued, blissfully ignorant of the history quietly unfolding behind palace doors. And yet, she knew that this night, this encounter, had already begun to shape the destiny of the monarchy. Every choice she would make from now on would be guided by the trust placed in her, the silent oath to uphold what was true, and the quiet courage to act when others might falter. The monarchy, often seen as distant and ceremonial, had revealed to her its most vulnerable and sacred truth, that its survival depended not on crowns or ceremonies, but on the conscience and integrity of those who served it faithfully. The morning light crept gently into the palace, brushing the gilded halls with a soft golden glow. Yet inside, the atmosphere was anything but serene. Buckingham's grand corridors, usually echoing with measured footsteps and quiet routines, now seemed to hum with unspoken tension. News travels fast in royal households, but some secrets travel slower, carried only by those who know the weight of what they hold, and one such secret had begun its delicate, invisible journey. The previous night's encounter, the midnight summons, was still fresh in her mind. She had carried the sealed envelope close, tucked away where only she could reach it, and yet she felt its weight with every step. Not merely paper and wax, it contained the Queen's last counsel, her moral command, a guide for navigating the turbulence that often lay hidden behind the polished facade of royalty. It was an inheritance not of wealth nor of titles, but of trust, responsibility, and conscience. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint shuffle of approaching footsteps. It was a servant quietly delivering a note with the usual precision and discretion. The message was simple. The king wishes to see you immediately. She paused. Did he know? Could he sense the significance of what had occurred? She tucked the Queen's envelope deeper into her satchel, heart tightening. Transparency had its place, but some truths demanded patience, observation, and the courage to act only when the moment was right. As she made her way to the king's private study, the corridors felt unusually long, almost oppressive. Every portrait seemed to watch, every familiar painting of past monarchs silently scrutinizing the next chapter of history. She had long understood that in a palace, appearances mattered, but so did the unseen currents, alliances, loyalties, and whispers that could shift power as surely as any decree. Inside the study, the king looked up from his papers, expression carefully neutral, yet eyes tinged with curiosity. Or was it suspicion? He gestured for her to sit, the air between them thick with unspoken questions. I understand you've had an audience with my mother, he said carefully, voice measured, polite, yet undeniably probing. She nodded subtly, choosing her words with care. Yes, your majesty, it was. Personal. The king's eyes flickered briefly. And did she leave anything for me to know? No, she replied, calm but firm. Nothing for anyone but me. It was a delicate dance of loyalty and discretion. She could sense the shift in the room, a subtle tension that spoke volumes. The king was aware of her devotion to the late queen, yet the very fact that some knowledge had been withheld, some truths entrusted solely to her, introduced an invisible wedge, a delicate imbalance of trust and curiosity. The conversation continued, measured, polite on the surface, yet each word carried weight. Beneath the veneer of civility lay the silent calculations of what was shared, what was held back, and what might ripple outward if misunderstood. The king's advisers had long emphasized transparency, predictability, and control, but some matters could not be dictated. Some truths required intuition, courage, and quiet observation. Later, as she walked alone through the palace gardens, the crisp morning air offered little comfort. The neatly trimmed hedges, the familiar fountains, and the echo of distant bird calls did nothing to ease the tension coiling within her. The envelope, still tucked safely, seemed to pulse with silent urgency. She understood, in a way that only those who carry secrets of consequence could, that her path was now irrevocably altered. Every interaction, every glance, could influence the fragile equilibrium of power, perception, and legacy. Rumors began, as they always do. Staff whispered in corridors, aides exchanged knowing looks, and subtle glances were passed in dining halls and parlors. Not all gossip was grounded in malice, but some carried the seed of speculation that, in a palace, could grow unchecked. Some hinted at unusual behavior, quiet confidence, sudden restraint, a cautious distance from the usual circle. Others suggested intrigue, loyalty, or defiance. Yet only she knew the truth, and it remained locked, like the Queen's seal itself, until the time was right. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, public curiosity began to mount. Social gatherings, tabloids, and the occasional newspaper hinted at unseen tensions, carefully skimming over facts while embellishing narrative. Yet even the most speculative commentary could not grasp the depth, the subtle moral responsibilities that had been entrusted to her. To outsiders it was gossip, to insiders it was the shaping of destiny itself. Inside Buckingham, subtle alliances began to form and fracture. Courtiers who had once been close now found themselves observing her with a mixture of respect and cautious wariness. Some admired her composure, recognizing in her a reflection of the late Queen's quiet authority. Others felt the threat of influence, the power of discretion that could challenge assumptions and unsettle expectations. All watched, all speculated, yet few understood the stakes. At night, the palace grew silent once more, and she retreated to her private quarters. There, seated beside the window overlooking the moonlit gardens, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The queen's voice, soft yet unwavering, echoed in her memory. Guard the crown's soul, not its image. Trust is earned, but it can be shattered with a whisper. Those words were not just counsel, they were a creed, a guiding principle for navigating the unseen labyrinth of loyalty, ambition, and morality. Sleep was fitful, haunted by imagined scenarios and whispered conjectures. Who could be trusted? Which courtiers acted out of duty, which out of ambition? Every step through the palace corridors during daylight seemed shadowed by the memory of night, the weight of responsibility pressing like a constant reminder that knowledge, unlike power, could not always be wielded openly. The following days brought subtle challenges. Invitations to engagements, appearances and official duties were accompanied by scrutiny, gentle probing, and the quiet calculation of influence. Conversations that seemed casual were loaded with meaning. Every choice, every pause, every measured response carried unspoken implications. She had learned to move carefully, observing, listening, and absorbing. The palace was a chessboard, and she was at peace with both limited movement and critical influence. And yet, through it all, she found solace in small, unexpected moments, a nod of recognition from a loyal aide, the silent understanding of a trusted confidant, the quiet satisfaction of aligning her actions with principles rather than perception. For while others sought acclaim, she had been entrusted with something far more profound, the moral legacy of the monarchy itself. Whispers persisted, of course. Subtle remarks from courtiers, ambiguous questions from advisers, fleeting expressions from distant relatives. The palace was alive with speculation, yet she moved through it like a calm current, measured, deliberate, unshaken in the knowledge that her duty was greater than immediate appearances or temporary misunderstandings. Every secret she safeguarded, every decision made in restraint was a testament to the trust placed in her. And yet, even as she navigated the delicate balance of loyalty and discretion, a new tension emerged, one not of whispers or speculation, but of intrigue closer to the throne. Certain family members, sensing shifts in behavior, began asking questions, probing in ways subtle enough to be polite yet pointed enough to unsettle. It was a quiet battle of perception, each interaction a potential spark, each glance a silent assessment. Through it all, she remained composed, aware that patience, observation, and integrity were more powerful than confrontation. She had been entrusted with an invisible crown, a responsibility born not of title but of faith, and she knew that misstep could jeopardize not just her position, but the very stability of the monarchy. The palace at dawn seemed almost serene, its familiar architecture bathed in a soft golden light that belied the tension simmering within. Yet for those who walked its corridors, every step carried an undercurrent of unease. The events of the previous night, the midnight summons, the Queen's whispered counsel, and the secret envelope had not remained confined to memory. Even in silence, secrets have a way of spreading, carried by glances, subtle remarks, and the weight of expectation. She moved carefully, aware that every gesture could be scrutinized, every word interpreted. Courtiers who had once been indifferent now observed her with cautious respect, some with barely concealed curiosity. The envelope in her possession was not just a letter, it was a symbol of trust, an invisible crown placed upon her conscience. She had come to understand that in the palace, influence rarely came from titles or ceremony. True power resided in the knowledge that others did not possess, and in the courage to wield it wisely. It was during one quiet breakfast that the first ripple of tension reached her. A senior aide, whose loyalty was unquestioned, yet whose curiosity was natural, leaned in slightly and murmured, "There's talk among some of the younger staff. Unusual observations. Nothing specific, just a sense of change." She nodded, acknowledging the warning without revealing her awareness. In the palace, discretion was everything. To speak too freely was to invite speculation, to act without care risked misinterpretation. Later that morning, she attended an engagement with her husband. Cameras flashed, capturing smiles, formalities, and fleeting gestures, yet beneath the composed exterior, a subtle tension lingered. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. She considered the Queen's words. "Not all who bow are loyal." That phrase had echoed relentlessly in her thoughts. Who within these gilded walls could be trusted implicitly? And who might be playing a careful game, smiling outwardly while maneuvering behind the scenes? Even her husband, perceptive and supportive though he was, could not see all. Their conversation, though polite and light, felt like navigating a maze of unseen traps. She smiled, nodded, and laughed when appropriate, but her thoughts were focused, analysing, observing, and noting every subtle shift in behaviour, every nuanced exchange. The palace, with all its grandeur and tradition, was as much a battlefield as any war room she had read about. By midday, rumours had begun to circulate more deliberately. It started as whispered conjecture among minor staff, an unusual glance here, a hushed conversation there. These whispers travelled quickly, picked up by the palace press office and magnified, reinterpreted, and occasionally distorted. She felt the subtle pressure of observation, the invisible eyes that tracked every decision. Yet she remained composed, understanding that patience and restraint were her greatest allies. The secret entrusted to her was not meant for immediate revelation, and she would not betray it. In the afternoon, she was called to a private meeting with a senior family member, one known for prudence and a careful ear. The conversation was cordial, yet tinged with inquiry. "I've noticed a shift in your demeanour," the relative said, voice measured. "A quiet confidence and careful distance from some of the usual discussions. Is there something we should know?" She smiled gently. "I'm simply reflecting on the responsibilities we carry. The Queen's legacy is not something to be handled lightly." Her answer was truthful but incomplete. It was enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing the delicate truth. The relative inclined their head, seemingly reassured, yet the subtle tension remained. In the palace, no answer was ever simple, no gesture ever insignificant. The afternoon passed with engagements, each carefully orchestrated, each observation logged silently in her mind. She noted interactions, remembered promises, and considered the moral implications of each choice. The weight of the Queen's counsel pressed on her, yet it was not oppressive. It was guiding, shaping, and preparing her for the subtle challenges that lay ahead. As evening approached, the palace grew quieter, but the shadows lengthened, both outside and within. She retreated to a private sitting room, seeking solitude. The envelope rested on the table, its seal unbroken, a reminder of trust and the weight of responsibility. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Queen's words had been clear. Not all loyalty is visible, not all service is recognized, and the moral heart of the monarchy must be protected, often in silence. The night brought a new layer of complexity. A minor leak seemingly innocuous appeared in a social column, speculation about unusual behavior, discreet observations, and hints of private meetings. Though vague, the implication was clear to those who knew something significant had shifted, and her restraint was drawing attention. She recognized the pattern immediately, the way rumors gather, multiply, and evolve in a palace environment. What began as harmless gossip could, if left unchecked, become a tool, a weapon, or a distraction. She knew the next steps had to be measured. Any misstep could undermine her credibility or, worse, compromise the very trust she had been given. Each move required foresight, patience, and a nuanced understanding of human behavior. Allies would need to be chosen carefully, communication would need to be precise, and the boundaries of loyalty constantly assessed. It was an intricate dance where every step mattered, and misjudging the rhythm could have consequences far beyond her own position. Late into the night, she received a note from a trusted confidant within the palace. The message was subtle but clear. Not everyone is as they appear. Watch carefully. Trust selectively. She tucked the note into her journal, a quiet affirmation that she was not alone, yet remained vigilant. It was a delicate reassurance, a reminder that even in isolation, support could exist if recognized and nurtured. The hours passed slowly, each tick of the clock marking both time and tension. She reviewed every detail of the previous days, analyzed interactions, and planned for upcoming engagements. The palace, with all its history, tradition, and protocol, was alive with the invisible threads of influence. She understood that survival and the preservation of legacy depended not on power, but on perception, discretion, and moral courage. By the early hours of the morning, a plan had begun to form in her mind. She would act with care, uphold her moral obligation, and observe the subtle dynamics of loyalty and ambition around her. Patience was essential, but so was readiness. The Queen's guidance had prepared her for moments exactly like this. Moments where visible authority mattered less than quiet vigilance and judicious action. The chapter closes with her seated alone, the envelope still intact, a soft fire flickering nearby. She gazed through the palace windows at the moonlight illuminating the gardens. In that silence, she felt the gravity of her duty. The monarchy's future was fragile, its stability precarious, and the moral compass entrusted to her would guide decisions that could resonate for generations. The whispers of the corridors, the subtle movements of courtiers, and the unspoken challenges ahead were all part of a delicate balance she was now charged to maintain. The palace felt different that morning. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that hinted at change. Courtiers moved with precision, but the usual undercurrents of gossip and speculation seemed quieter, almost tentative. The late Queen's influence lingered, subtle yet undeniable, as though her presence continued to shape the palace even in her absence. And at the centre of it all stood her confidant, carrying the weight of trust, responsibility, and a secret that could define the monarchy's future. She had spent weeks navigating the intricate web of loyalty, whispers, and subtle power plays. Every engagement, every interaction had been measured. The envelope, still sealed, had become a symbol of restraint, a test of patience and judgment. The Queen's words echoed in her mind, "Guard the crown's soul, not its image." Trust is earned, but it can be shattered with a whisper. That guidance had shaped every decision, every careful step she had taken through the palace corridors. Yet the world outside was beginning to notice. Rumours had matured into stories, and stories into speculation. Headlines hinted at intrigue, the public fascinated by the subtle dynamics of a monarchy that often seemed untouchable. Social media was alight with questions. Who truly holds influence? Which confidants are shaping the future? It was a dangerous game, and one she played with quiet precision. Her silence was not defiance, it was strategy. In the private chambers that afternoon, she finally opened the Queen's envelope. The wax seal broke with a soft crack, revealing the carefully penned words inside. They were not instructions of authority or demands of obedience. They were a moral compass, a set of principles designed to guide decisions in the shadows, when public image conflicted with conscience. The Queen's handwriting was elegant, deliberate, yet the message was clear. Integrity over ceremony, courage over convenience, and humanity over hierarchy. It was a reminder that the monarchy's power was not in crowns or titles, but in the choices made by those who served it faithfully. As she absorbed the letter, a quiet determination settled over her. The palace, with all its grandeur, its ritual, and its legacy, was now entrusted to her discernment. She understood that loyalty was fragile, that influence could be wielded for good or ill, and that the moral heartbeat of the monarchy rested in her hands. It was not a burden to be feared, but a responsibility to be honoured. That evening, the king requested a private audience. There was a subtle shift in his manner, a recognition of the gravity of the situation. She greeted him with calm composure, acknowledging the delicate balance between transparency and discretion.
She just translates a vectored moment of measured reflection that some truths are entrusted differently than others, and that your judgment, honed by guidance from my mother, is critical to the stability of this family and the institution we serve.
She nodded, choosing her words carefully. Your Majesty, loyalty is not always visible. Influence is not always public. But the Queen's Council has shown me that what matters most is safeguarding the essence of this monarchy, not its appearance. It was a turning point. The King's eyes softened, a subtle acknowledgement of trust and understanding. For the first time since the Queen's passing, the weight of uncertainty seemed to shift. Not away from responsibility, but towards clarity, a shared understanding of what duty truly meant. In the following days, the palace began to settle into a rhythm shaped by discretion and moral clarity. Courtiers adapted, realigning their priorities in subtle ways, aware that influence was now measured by actions and integrity rather than ceremony alone. Alliances shifted quietly, with those who understood the unspoken responsibilities gravitating towards her, and those motivated purely by ambition realizing that power alone would no longer suffice. The public, meanwhile, began to sense the change engagements that once seemed purely ceremonial now carried an undercurrent of authenticity. Smiles, gestures, and public appearances were no longer simply for show, they reflected a deeper commitment to the principles entrusted to her. The monarchy's image, carefully maintained for centuries, was now infused with substance, moral authority, and a visible human connection that resonated with the people. Yet the most profound changes occurred within the family. Tensions that had lingered beneath formalities began to ease, replaced by cautious understanding. The king, learning to navigate the subtleties of influence and loyalty, embraced a more measured approach, seeking harmony rather than control. Camilla, initially unsettled by the quiet power she observed, gradually recognized that leadership was not only about visibility, but about integrity and foresight. And Princess Anne, whose pragmatism had always been invaluable, became an ally and guide, reinforcing the silent moral compass the Queen had entrusted. Through it all, she remained mindful of the lessons embedded in the Queen's words. Every decision was guided by reflection, patience, and a commitment to integrity. Every interaction, public or private, became a measure of loyalty, a test of character, and a reinforcement of the values she had been charged to protect. The envelope, now no longer a mystery, had transformed from a burden into a beacon, illuminating the path forward. As the weeks passed, the palace shifted from uncertainty to quiet confidence. Decisions were made with deliberation, communication became more nuanced, and alliances stabilized. It was a monarchy that no longer relied solely on tradition, but on the careful stewardship of those who understood its deeper purpose. The Queen's legacy, preserved through her council, now lived on not only in memory, but in practice. A sense of calm had returned to Buckingham. The lessons learned from secrecy, discretion, and moral responsibility had been integrated into daily life. The monarchy was no longer simply a symbol of continuity, it had become a reflection of conscience, duty, and human integrity. And at its centre stood her, not as a ruler, but as a guardian of the principles that truly mattered. The final hours of the day brought a quiet moment of reflection. She walked through the gardens, the moonlight soft on the leaves, the night air crisp and clear. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the Queen's trust, the enormity of the responsibility, and the quiet satisfaction of fulfilling a promise that transcended ceremony or ambition. She understood that true power lies not in being seen, but in acting with conviction and protecting what is unseen. And as the palace settled into silence, the future appeared both fragile and bright. The moral compass had been preserved, the legacy safeguarded, and the monarchy's heart remained intact. For those who understood, leadership was not measured by crowns, titles, or appearances, but by the courage to act rightly, even in secrecy, and the wisdom to uphold truth when all else is hidden. In that quiet night, with the palace breathing around her, she knew the journey was far from over, but the first steps had been taken, guided by loyalty, insight, and an unwavering commitment to conscience. The Queen's spirit, her wisdom, and her final counsel lived on, shaping the choices of those who would now carry the legacy forward.